Hello, this is Eleanor with Audible Local Ledger. It's Wednesday, July 22nd, and I'll be reading today stories from the Sun Chronicle. First headline: Was she criminally responsible? Insanity is a hard case to make, experts say. By Charlie McKenna. When Lindsay Clancy's trial begins, one fact will not be in dispute. She killed her 3 children. In his opening statement to jurors, defense lawyer Kevin Reddington will almost certainly admit that the 35-year-old mother of 3 used exercise bands to strangle 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan in the basement of the family's Duxbury home in January of 23. That's because Clancy is pursuing what Massachusetts calls a lack of criminal responsibility defense, more commonly known as insanity. As a result, the central question at her trial will not be whether she killed the children. Instead, jurors will be asked to determine if she had a mental disease or defect that prevented her from understanding she was committing a crime or doing something wrong. They must also decide if the mental disease or defect meant Clancy could not comply with the law. Prosecutors must prove neither was the case to secure a conviction. Defenses like the one Clancy is pursuing are extremely challenging and often unsuccessful, experts told Mass Live. The task is all the more difficult because of just how hard the facts from the underlying case are. Everybody is repelled by that act, and they can't imagine why someone would ever do that, said longtime criminal defense attorney J.W. Carney Jr. What the lawyer has to do is play the role of a college professor speaking to a seminar of students. You have to bring the jury along step by step so they will appreciate that this woman indeed suffered from a very serious mental illness that kept getting worse. Clancy's defense rests on 2 interconnected arguments. Reddington has long claimed she was suffering from postpartum depression and psychosis at the time of the killings. Those illnesses were only made worse by failed attempts at treatment that left Clancy over-medicated, according to the defense. It's a toxic soup, Reddington recently told reporters. It's a combination of medication, postpartum, and lack of adequate medical care. Plymouth County prosecutors will argue Clancy carefully planned the killings, sending her husband out to get takeout and pick up medication to give herself time to carry out the murders. They have charged Clancy with 3 counts of first-degree murder on theories of deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty. The defendant consistently denied hearing voices or having any type of visual or auditory hallucinations before killing her children, Assistant Plymouth DA Jennifer Sprague wrote in a court filing. A key part of the government's case is expected to be testimony about Clancy's behavior on the day of the killings. That day, she took her daughter to the pediatrician, spoke to the manager of a local CVS on the phone, and made another call to order takeout. To counteract that, the defense will have to give jurors evidence of Clancy's mental health diagnoses and treatment before the killings. If the incident that led to the crime is sort of the first time the behavior has manifested itself, that's a really hard sell because people are really skeptical of that, said Christopher Dearborn, a law professor at Suffolk University. If there's a history of diagnosed mental illness and treatment, that's a really strong factor. While Clancy's conduct before and after the killings will offer circumstantial evidence of her mental state, all that matters for her criminal responsibility is the specific moment of the killings, said Daniel Medwed, a law professor at Northeastern University. What happens if Clancy succeeds? Lack of criminal responsibility is an affirmative defense, similar in some ways to arguing self-defense or asserting that a third party committed the crime. But there is a key difference in the law, Medway said. Lack of criminal responsibility is not a justification for killing, like self-defense. There is a common misconception that a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity is equivalent to a typical acquittal. In reality, a defendant acquitted in a lack of criminal responsibility case is ordered committed to a secure mental health facility where they are detained until a judge determines they are no longer a threat to public safety. It's likely that the defendant would be committed for a long period of time, Medwed said in a telephone interview. The idea is, at least in theory, The person would be getting the treatment that they need, but also being confined so as not to pose a public safety risk. Those misconceptions make jury selection especially important in lack of criminal responsibility cases, experts said. What to expect at trial. Jury selection at Clancy's trial began on Monday. Judge William Sullivan intends to seat 18. Last week, both Reddington and Sprague asked Sullivan for more than the 18 peremptory challenges they are receiving, allowing them to strike potential jurors without providing a reason. Though the judge denied the request, impanelment is expected to be an arduous process. When they learn they've got a case of this magnitude, it really becomes overwhelming for some jurors, Carney said. That doesn't become apparent without extensively questioning them. It's really about deselection sometimes more than it's about selection and trying to, in this situation, ferret out anybody who thinks that lack of criminal responsibility defenses are just TV baloney, added Dearborn. Once selection is complete, jurors face a difficult task in Clancy's case. Massachusetts does not provide guidance as to what does and does not count as a mental disease or defect. Judges are told to instruct jurors that a mental disease or defect need not fit into a formal medical diagnosis, and that it is ultimately in their hands to determine whether Clancy was suffering from one. And they are likely to have to weigh competing testimony from experts hired by both the defense and the prosecution. Unlike most trials, where defense experts typically get the last word, in Clancy's case, the prosecution's mental health experts are set to be offered as rebuttal evidence. Clancy has undergone numerous mental health evaluations since the killings. She has spoken to at least 3 experts hired by the prosecution, as well as experts retained by her defense. Jurors are likely also to hear from physicians who treated Clancy before the killings. In a case where numerous experts will take the stand, the best witnesses are those who can connect with jurors, said Carney. You could have a Nobel Prize-winning physician about mental illness, but if he's very stilted and just gives a medical answer to every question, then you're going to have trouble. You want to have an expert who's polite, who uses regular language to explain difficult concepts. One factor jurors may look at when evaluating who's expert to rely on is whether they've testified for both prosecutors and defense lawyers in the past. Such experts land in the sweet spot for jurors, said Dearborn, who also emphasized the importance of an expert's resume and qualifications. I think jurors have a pretty good meter. What you hope they will do is not be predisposed to not believe it and give it a shot, because that's their responsibility, is to listen and examine the evidence. Hopefully the jury listens to the science rather than making assumptions, because everybody comes in with preconceptions around this stuff, and one of the most powerful ones is, oh, somebody acts normal, they couldn't have been that mentally ill, he said. That's not necessarily the truth. Next headline. 250 years after his capture in Boston Harbor, a Scotsman who switched sides is honored in Mansfield, by Madison Dunphy. 250 years after he was captured in Boston Harbor during the Revolutionary War, a Scottish soldier buried in Mansfield has finally been honored with an American flag at his grave. The flag was placed at Happy Hollow Cemetery off York Road, marking the service of Archibald Todd, a member of the 71st Regiment of Foot, known as Fraser's Highlanders. Laurie Ranker, vice president of the Mansfield Historical Society, added the flag and its holder, which were provided by the Daughters of the American Revolution. In June of 1776, American privateers and shore batteries captured 5 British transport ships, including the George and Annabella, in Boston Harbor. The ships carried 185 soldiers of the 71st Regiment of Foot from Scotland, unaware that the British had already evacuated Boston months earlier. Todd was among those soldiers sent to fight for England and was taken prisoner when the ship sailed into the harbor. They were then sent to communities around the state as prisoners. Later, some joined the Continental Army, fought in the Revolution, and received honorable discharges. Todd enlisted in Sutton, but moved to Mansfield shortly after the war ended and married a Mansfield woman. Since he enlisted in Sutton, he was not on Mansfield's list and had not received a flag until now, Ranker said. He was missed for a flag to be put on when they did the others on Memorial Day, so I tracked down a flag for him, Ranker said. Ranker's original idea was to connect with a bagpiper from Scotland to mark the placing of the flag when Scottish visitors were in town for the World Cup matches. That, however, did not pan out. To honor the anniversary of the capture of the Scottish Highlanders in Boston of June 1776, Ranker placed the flag in June. Next headline: Norfolk officers investigated. Probe finds ex-deputy chief and sergeant violated department policies, by Stephen Peterson, Norfolk. An independent investigation into allegations involving 2 Norfolk police supervisors found multiple violations of department policies, including conflicts of interest stemming from an inappropriate personal relationship, town officials said Tuesday. Former Deputy Chief Michelle Palladini and former Sergeant Samuel Webb are no longer employed by the Norfolk Police Department. Police Chief James Barrett, who joined the department as chief last September, ordered the review after concerns were raised regarding the handling of a 2023 internal affairs investigation and subsequent allegations of misconduct. The investigation identified numerous violations of department policies and procedures by the former employees. Among the findings were that an inappropriate personal relationship created significant conflicts of interest, compromised the integrity of a prior internal affairs investigation, and resulted in conduct inconsistent with the standards expected of Norfolk police officers, the town said in a statement released late Tuesday. The investigation also found that Webb engaged in additional misconduct unrelated to the relationship, including improper conduct towards subordinate employees and other policy violations. Neither Palladini nor Webb remain employed by the police department. Barrett has forwarded the investigative findings to the Massachusetts Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission and has recommended that both former officers be decertified. The Post Commission certifies police officers, which allows them to work in law enforcement in Massachusetts. Our residents must trust that the Norfolk Police Department operates at the highest levels of professionalism, honesty, and integrity. No employee is above accountability. When trust is broken, we must address it openly and thoroughly, Barrett said. These allegations were incredibly, and I believe they deserved an impartial review. With the review complete, we have taken every action available to us, including referring the findings to the Post Commission. The conduct outlined in the independent report is deeply troubling and falls far short of the standards the town expects from its public employees, particularly those entrusted with leadership, Town Administrator Rob Garrity said. I appreciate Chief Barrett's commitment to conducting an independent, thorough review and taking appropriate action. Transparency and accountability are essential to maintaining the public's trust, and the town of Norfolk remains committed to both. The town retained the services of retired Carver Police Chief Arthur A. Parker, Jr. of Billingsgate Associates to conduct the investigation. This ensured that the final determination would be thorough, impartial, and independent, the town said. Barrett didn't respond to a request for further comment. The town said since it is a personnel matter, town and police officials would have no further comment. Palladini rose through the ranks to become deputy chief. She had worked for the Stonehill College and Franklin Police Department before becoming a reserve officer in Norfolk in 2012. She became a full-time officer 2 years later and also worked as a detective and school resource officer. She was sworn in as a sergeant in 2020. Palladini is also a certified sexual assault investigator and has taught classes in rape aggression defense tactics. She also taught lifestyle courses for younger children that have helped them transition into successful young adults. She won numerous awards for many innovative programs she developed and implemented throughout the schools and community. Webb had also served as a detective with the local police department. As a reminder, you're listening to Audible Local Ledger with stories from the Sun Chronicle. Our next headline: Ice cream truck driver injured in Attleboro rollover, by Sun Chronicle staff. Attleboro. The driver of an ice cream truck suffered minor injuries after the vehicle rolled over Tuesday at the Interstate 95 off-ramp near South Avenue. Fire department crews responded at about noon to the report of a rollover crash in the area of South Avenue at the I-95 off-ramp and, upon arrival, found an ice cream truck resting on its side. The driver was able to exit the vehicle on her own before emergency crews arrived. She was examined by City Fire Department EMS personnel for minor injuries before being transported to Memorial Hospital. One lane of traffic was closed while firefighters and police worked to secure the scene and remove the vehicle. The roadway was reopened and crews cleared the scene at approximately 12:40 p.m. The cause of the crash remains under investigation by Attleboro Police. Next headline: Sculptures Coming to Mansfield by Madison Dunphy. Mansfield. The 250th Celebration Committee is looking to use leftover funds for legacy projects around town, including geese statues, a time capsule plaque, and a Liberty tree planting. Select Board members at a meeting last week approved the committee's charge for this legacy project until December 31st. Town manager Mallory Aronstein first suggested hornet statues around town to reflect the public school's mascot. She was informed that geese statues would be the better fit due to the previous long-term tradition of a goose parade in town. This goose parade was an annual tradition that started in the 1860s by what used to be the Austin Goose Farm on Winter Street in East Mansfield. According to Kevin McNatt and Andrew Tedesco, members of the Mansfield Historical Society, geese would arrive by train from Canada and were unloaded at the local freight yards. They then would parade down North Main, Oakland, Maple, and Winter Streets to be fattened up for the seasonal markets. Apparently, geese are our thing, Aronstein said in a select board meeting last week. I was told about why geese are our thing, and I feel badly for these little death-marching geese, but they are our thing, so we are running with it. The statues of these geese would be similar to the fox sculptures seen around Foxborough, Aronstein said. They would tie into the historical trail that the committee started, highlighting historically significant locations throughout town. Each goose would have a QR code explaining what the site was and why it's meaningful, along with a link to an audio file in which members of the committee would recite the script for each site, Aronstein said. This way, members of the committee can be commemorated as well for what they gave the town and putting off some really great activities and ways to celebrate, Aronstein said. The committee is now on the goose chase to find these statues, whether they be made of fiberglass or concrete. Regardless of the material used to make the statues, Aronstein said they would want them painted. The committee has put together a PowerPoint presentation on the project that can be found on the town's website. Each sculpture would be uniquely designed to reflect Mansfield's history, culture, or identity, with the collection creating a self-guided history hunt that encourages exploration, learning, tourism, and community pride, the presentation states. Rather than a one-time event, this project would remain part of the community for years to come. The next steps for the committee include picking the sculpture design, the historic locations where the statues will be placed, what the audio recordings will entail, and the themes for the artist's artwork. In terms of total costs, the committee will seek vendors to create large outdoor sculptures for the project. Based on Foxborough's foxes, they could expect to pay approximately $7,500 for a custom mold, and the unit price for a 5-foot-tall fox was about $1,300 each, the presentation stated. The plaque on the time capsule would be a minor expense, Aronstein said. The Liberty tree planting is still in the planning phase, with the hope to potentially plant in September. This would also come with its own ceremony, if completed. Next headline: Plainville, Franklin get grants for hazard mitigation plans by Stephen Peterson. Plainville and Franklin are among communities that are receiving state grants for infrastructure projects and to help communities compete for federal funding. Plainville is slated to receive $45,000 to update its hazard mitigation plan. Franklin and Bellingham were awarded $30,000 to update their joint hazard mitigation plan. Grants were awarded to transportation, clean energy, and resilience projects in 21 communities across the state. 14 awards were made to rural communities. The awards were made via the Municipal and Tribal Technical Assistance Program, administered by the Federal Funds and Infrastructure Office. The program supports technical assistance activities for projects that are seeking or have received federal funds. Next headline: A Pawtucket man gets prison for a fatal crash. A Pawtucket man has been sentenced to 10 years in prison for a crash early New Year's Day in 2022 that killed a passenger who was a Providence preschool teacher. Gregory Miller, 47, pleaded no contest to one count of failure to stop after being involved in a crash that resulted in death and one count of driving to endanger, resulting in death. Miller was sentenced on Friday in Providence Superior Court to 15 years, with 10 years to serve at the Adult Correctional Institute in Cranston. Next headline: City's water ban didn't have to happen, by Peter Gay. Please allow me to share some thoughts and observations as I wonder why Attleboro officials once again failed to be proactive in lessening the need for a full ban on outdoor water use. As many of you know, I have called on the mayor to implement light restrictions in the spring each year of the past 2 years. This is what I wrote on April 15th of this year. I was happy to see a report on WJAR Channel 10 about the greater Attleboro area no longer being in a drought. That may change, however, as water demand increases over the next few months, and is why I'd love to see city officials be proactive and implement an odd-even watering schedule. The move would help manage peak demand, keep lawns healthy, save money, and preserve the level of the reservoir. It would also lessen the likelihood of having to implement a complete ban later this summer. Thinking the leader of our city might know more about our water supply, I wrote this only 5 weeks ago. Although the area is a severe drought, Attleboro residents are able to water their lawns daily. I have often been critical of the mayor in this space, but have to give her credit for not needing to implement odd-even restrictions or an outright ban. I considered not paying to have my sprinkler system activated this year, but am now happy I did. Thank you, Mayor. The city implemented Level 2 water restrictions less than 2 weeks later on June 30th. Automatic sprinklers and irrigation systems were prohibited, as well as power washing and car washing. Handheld watering was allowed between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. It's important to note the state declared southeastern Massachusetts to be in a Level 2 drought, but the city remained at Level 1 restrictions for another 3 weeks, which is why I was optimistic. A full ban on non-essential outdoor water use was imposed just 9 days later. That same day, I saw a local irrigation company installing a sprinkler system in a neighbor's yard. They probably had no idea they wouldn't be able to use it for the foreseeable future. I'm sure, like most city residents, they were under the assumption that the new tie-in with Pawtucket left the city with enough water to get through the summer without any restrictions, never mind a full ban. Let's hope the mayor learns her lesson and implements an odd-even schedule next spring to preserve water. Are you smarter than a fifth grader? That question was asked of North Attleboro fifth graders as part of the Solid Waste Department's annual recycling contest. What is e-waste? A. Edible waste, B. Easter waste, C. Electronic waste, or D. Eternal waste. In honor of this past weekend's Open Championship, I have another question for those of you who play golf or watch it on television. When asked how many balls are typically lost in a round, which answer did most respondents give? None, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, more? Kudos to North Attleboro officials for celebrating the nation's 250th birthday, with more events than any other local community. The town had 15 events scheduled from July 4th through July 19th. The number of events surpassed those in some other large cities. Here's hoping Friday night's performance by the North Attleboro Community Band before and during the Kids' Day fireworks is the start of a new tradition. I'm sure organizers will find a way to make it easier for the thousands gathered on Kelly Field next to the town's middle school to hear the music, especially the 1812 Overture. It reminded me of my younger days when my family would walk from our home on 3rd Street to Capron Park's Half Shell to watch Tom Caruso lead the city orchestra. The concert would conclude with the start of Attleboro's fireworks. The answer to the recycling question is C, electronic waste, which includes discarded electrical or electronic devices. Attleboro residents can discard them by calling 508-822-1579 for curbside pickup or by dropping them off at the recycling center at 29 Pond Street, North Attleboro. Residents can drop off at the recycling center at 777 Mount Hope Street. The majority of Golf magazine readers, 46%, typically lose one ball per round. Another 25% lose none, 20% lose two, 7% lose 3 to 4, and less than 1% lose 5 or more. Today in history, on July 22, 1933, aviator Wiley Post landed at Floyd Bennett Field in New York City, completing the first solo flight around the world in 7 days, 18 hours, and 49 minutes. Also on this date, in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln presented to his cabinet a preliminary draft of the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1934, bank robber John Dillinger was shot to death by federal agents outside Chicago's Biograph Theater, where he had just seen the Clark Gable movie Manhattan Melodrama. In 1937, the U.S. Senate rejected President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's proposal to add more justices to the Supreme Court. In 1942, the Nazis began transporting Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto to the Treblinka concentration camps. In 1943, American forces led by George Patton captured Palermo, Sicily during World War II. In 1975, the House of Representatives joined the Senate in voting to restore the American citizenship of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. In 1991, police in Milwaukee arrested Jeffrey Dahmer, who later confessed to killing 17 men and boys. Dahmer was sentenced to life in prison and was killed by another inmate in 1994. In 1992, Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar escaped from his luxury prison near Medellin. He was killed by security forces in 1993. In 2011, Anders Breivik, a self-described militant nationalist, massacred 69 people in a Norwegian island youth retreat after detonating a bomb nearby Oslo that killed 8 others in the nation's worst violence since World War II. Today's birthday. Movie writer-director Paul Schrader is 80. Actor Danny Glover is 80. Rock singer Don Henley is 79. Arthur S.E. Hinton is 78. Film composer Alan Menken is 77. And actor Willem Dafoe is 71. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening.